Welcome. I'm Regina McCullum, and today we are taking on a big topic that's introduced on page 49 in your study book, What Just Happened to Me? We are asking the question, where does the temptation come from, and why would God allow it in the first place? When you think of temptation, do you imagine a little red devil sitting on your shoulder whispering in your ear? Well, that's not exactly wrong, but it's not completely right either. Let's start by defining the word temptation. The same word is also interpreted test or trial in the Bible, and we'll be using all three words interchangeably today. In the Greek Dictionary of New Testament words, we can see that there are various kinds of trials, and they are all defined as the proving of man's faithfulness, integrity, virtue, and constancy. In other words, temptations and trials put your character to the test. Temptations can take on all sorts of forms, and while they are going to look different for each of us, there are two main categories of trials or temptations. We'll talk about the first one today and the second one next time. The first, which you are probably most familiar with, is the temptation or enticement to sin. The purpose of this type of temptation is to get you to question God, deny Christ, act contrary to what you believe, or otherwise be shaken from your faith. These enticements can come from several sources, but the Apostle James assures us in James 1:13 that enticement to sin never comes from God. It says, "When tempted, no one should say, 'God is tempting me,' for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone." James goes on to explain that we are sometimes lured into sin by our own desires. Here, our own lust turns into poor choices that result in negative consequences. And we can't blame those on anyone but ourselves. When this is the case, though, confess your sin, turn away from it and toward God, and then lean into God's mercy and His promise that all things are within His ability to turn to good. Jesus promised to be our advocate before the Father when we make mistakes. And God's mercy is new every morning, and His forgiveness is immense. Now, sometimes the devil is the source of temptation. He tries to plant deceitful thoughts in your head, as it says in 2 Corinthians 11:3. Here, the Apostle Paul was talking to the believers in the city of Corinth when he said, "I am afraid that just as Eve was deceived by the serpent's cunning, your minds may somehow be led astray from your sincere and pure devotion to Christ." The devil will mess with your mind by planting thoughts in it that are contrary to God's best for you. And the best way to recognize and shut down Satan's lies is by knowing God's truth. Did you know that the way a counterfeiting expert gets so good at identifying fake money is by thoroughly studying the real thing? It's true. An expert is so familiar with the fine details of true dollar bills that he can spot a fake easily. And in the same way, the more you know about God's character, God's ways, and God's word, the greater the contrast will be between truth and the devil's lies. Listen, God knows the devil is cunning, and so He has given us tools to protect ourselves. Those tools include the Bible, prayer, the counsel of other believers we trust, and the testimony of those who have gone before us. And again, God's mercy is new every morning, and His forgiveness immense. Now, the devil also instigates difficult circumstances in order to cause you to question and reject God or become self-centered. You can see this happening in the story of Job in the Old Testament. Job went through some outrageous hardships that the devil threw his way, but he refused to doubt God. He did a lot of questioning of God, which, by the way, does not offend God. Questioning does not necessarily equal distrust. Job also had to do a lot of personal soul searching when he was working through these hardships, but he landed on his feet and was greatly rewarded on the other side of his struggle. What you need to know about the devil's tests is they are like traps. You've got to learn to recognize them so you can respond to them rightly and even avoid them. Paul told the Christians in Thessalonica to examine everything, hold fast to what is good, abstain from every form of evil. And the more you practice this, the easier it gets. Remember, you can always lean into God for His grace and mercy. And in Psalm 46:1, again, He promised to be an ever-present help in time of trouble. The Bible talks about times when other human beings are also the testers. All over the gospel stories, the Pharisees tested Jesus with their tricky questions. You know, the same word is used in these instances as when the devil tempted Jesus in the desert after he was baptized in water. In Matthew 16:1, it says these people put Jesus to the test. They were trying to trip him up so they would have an excuse to arrest him. That doesn't mean that everyone who questions what you are doing is the devil's advocate. Some people genuinely care about your welfare, and you know what? They will call you on things you're doing that don't feel right to them. But how do you know which is which? It's about motive. Are they trying to trip you up, or do they authentically care about you? Listen, you are not alone in this trials and temptations thing, because Jesus Himself went through so many temptations. He understands you. Hebrews 4:15 reports that Jesus was tempted in every way just like we are, yet without sin. That's why He makes such a great leader. He totally gets what you're going through. You know, on the night He was crucified, Jesus knew what was coming, and He was so stressed that drops of blood came out of the pores in His forehead. He called this night a test. He prayed, "Let this test pass from me, yet not my desire, but rather yours be done." Jesus showed us what passing the test looks like. All His life, He trusted in God's wisdom, loved others more than Himself, and confronted evil with good. And He passed the ultimate test by giving His life on behalf of others, trusting that God would give Him the strength and that God would raise Him from the dead as He had promised. Now, not every bad thing that happens is a test. Sin runs rampant in the world still today, and humans are given, by divine decree, a free will to choose for themselves who they will serve and how they will behave. Therefore, bad things happen all around you, and sometimes you are personally affected by them. But I have to keep reminding you that God has promised to be an ever-present help in time of trouble, meaning He knows trouble will come, but He has provided the help you need to overcome it, always. Now let's review really quick before we're done for today. We've been talking about where temptations and trials come from. We've seen that temptation can come from your own desires that get carried away. They can come from the devil's lies that we choose to listen to, and from traps he sets to try to get us to distrust God or become self-centered. And sometimes tough stuff just happens because we live in a world that has been corrupted and it affects us all. Shoosh! That's a lot of stuff going on in the spiritual world. But chin up now, there is some good news on this topic. Next time, we'll talk about temptations and trials that are not designed to tear you down, but rather to build you up. Stay tuned. I'll see you soon.